I was caught in a tough spot, not entirely sure what my next move should be. I'm a reasonably successful businessman, but knowing my wife of many years was cheating on me threw me off balance. I still loved her, but I wasn't about to let her make a fool of me either. I knew I had to tread carefully, and in the end, I made what would become the most significant decision of my life. Is this Mr. Calvin Smith? Damn, that wasn't what I wanted to hear, but I kept my cool and didn't break stride in my conversation with Matthew, the bartender. I'd only been back in Texas for 6 months after a self-imposed 3-year exile. How she found me was a mystery, but more importantly, why? I didn't turn or react, just kept going with the punchline to a dirty joke I'd been telling. Then, I felt a hand land on my shoulder. Mr. Smith, my name's Dean Harris. I've been hired to find you. I glanced at Matthew before barely turning my head. Do you want to keep that hand, Dean? He snatched his hand off my shoulder in a hurry. I delivered the punchline. Matthew broke into hearty laughter and popped open another Shiner Bock, telling me this one was on the house as he moved down the bar, still chuckling. Mr. Smith, we have some business to discuss. Harris pressed on. I'm not Smith, and unless you need me to weld something, we've got no business. End of story. Mr. Smith. Before he could finish, I had him on the floor. I tossed $20 on the bar, stretched out my right hand, waved at Matthew, and stood up to leave. You're a hard man to find, Mr. Smith. I've got no intention of starting my search over again. He stayed on the floor but had a taser aimed right at me, specifically at my crotch. As he stood up, wiping blood from his mouth, I had to admit, the little guy was more intimidating than I gave him credit for. I won't hesitate to use this, so why don't you sit down and we'll have a conversation. I saw Matthew walking over, but I gestured for him to stop. He nodded and stepped back. Let me know if you need anything, Miles, he said. Thanks, Matthew. I will. I turned back to Dean. Who carries a taser in Texas, huh? I leaned in, trying to size him up. Do I know you? Your manners could use some work, Mr. Smith. You can't be from Texas. He eyed me, determined. Call me Miles, and tell me what you want. Miles it is. Matthew, get us a couple of beers and put it on Dean's tab. I smiled and settled into the nearest booth. Now, tell me about this Smith guy and why he's got you all worked up. Harris looked me over, sizing me up, but decided to play along. Darren Smith. He was a wealthy businessman in Dallas. Disappeared without a trace over 3 years ago. He's married to Amber Smith, and they've got a 23-year-old daughter, Allison. My job is to bring him back to Dallas. 3 years and no trace, huh? So what's this got to do with me? I'm no Darren Smith. I'm Miles Walker, welder by trade, part-time guitarist, bad one at that, and I move around a bit. Before leaving Dallas, I made sure every detail was covered. I spent a small fortune creating a new identity for myself. I changed my appearance, grew out my hair, added a beard, packed on 30 pounds of fat and another 20 of muscle. Even if Amber stood right in front of me, she wouldn't know it was me. When I left, I traveled north and west, driving for 3 straight days. Found a trailer to lease, signed up for welding classes, and started from scratch. I left behind my whole life in Dallas. The money, the house, the cars, the cards, the phone, the wife who deceived me. All I took with me was cash. I bought a used Ford F-150 in cash and picked up a second-hand but beautiful Martin guitar. From there, I started living off the grid. No cell, no cards, just cash jobs and staying under the radar. Allison, though, my daughter, I couldn't completely walk away from her. About 15 months after I disappeared, I sent her an email from a public library. I let her know I was alive and that I still loved her. Every time I moved to a new place, I sent her another email. I never mentioned where I was or why I'd left. She'd have to get that story from her mother. Damn, Dean hissed. So, 3 years ago, Mr. Smith vanished, leaving his wife in a tough spot. Rumors swirled. Some thought he ran off with another woman. Others suspected foul play by Mrs. Smith. She had a rough time, both personally and financially. She tried to liquidate assets but couldn't. Without a declaration of death or power of attorney, she was stuck. Sure, there was money in the bank, but it didn't last long. Then, 16 months after Smith disappeared, Allison received an email claiming to be from him, and the police closed the case. Mrs. Smith, though, hired me to bring him back. Poor thing, I chuckled. But what's that got to do with me, Dean? May I call you Darren? You can call me Miles, just like everybody else. He stood his ground. I'm authorized to take you to the Dallas County Sheriff to face charges of fraud and abandonment if necessary. I couldn't help but laugh at his persistence. Fraud? Since when did leaving a marriage become a crime? Why would the sheriff care? Dean wasn't getting anywhere with me, so I finished my beer and slowly cocked my Glock under the table. He didn't even notice. When he finally did, it was too late. With the barrel now trained on him, he swallowed hard, carefully placing his taser on the table. Dean, let me tell you a story, I said, signaling Matthew for more beers. This one's on Dean's tab, by the way. Then I started telling him the story of a man named Darren. I can pinpoint the exact moment when I realized my marriage was falling apart. It was on Amber's 50th birthday. We had decided to spend the day quietly at our weekend home in the countryside, just the two of us. Amber had never been one for parties or big celebrations. Given our level of financial comfort, there wasn't much she didn't already own, which made choosing the right gift a challenge. I spent months thinking about it, even casually asking her friends for advice. I thought I had nailed it, but when she saw the gifts, her face gave everything away. For a second, her expression dropped before she forced a smile and thanked me. We'd been married for 24 years by that point, and I thought I knew her inside out. I could tell she'd expected something entirely different. So, I asked her straight up how she really felt. She insisted she was happy, but the strained smile told a different story. After pressing the issue, she finally admitted that while the gifts were fine, they weren't what she had hoped for. She couldn't even explain what she wanted, just that it wasn't what I had picked. That threw me off. If she didn't know what she wanted, how the hell was I supposed to? I apologized for ruining her big day and promised to make it right. She said I could make it up to her, but was surprised I hadn't thought more deeply about her 50th birthday. I tried explaining my thought process behind each gift, but the more I talked, the more irritated she became. Eventually, I told her I'd find a way to make amends, to which she snapped back, "If you'd thought about me enough in the first place, you wouldn't need to. You can't redo a 50th birthday." After that, she claimed she wasn't feeling well and wanted to return home. We drove back to Dallas in complete silence, both fuming. It wasn't the first time our marriage hit a low point. In fact, it almost didn't happen at all. Back in college, we had a long-distance relationship since Amber had already graduated and was 3 years older than me. One weekend, while visiting her, things started to unravel. We were walking downtown when this older guy, had to be around 50, came up and hugged her warmly. Amber introduced us, and he shook my hand with a smirk. His handshake was weak, something my dad always warned me about. I didn't like the guy right from the start. "Nice to meet you, Simon. You a friend of Amber's dad?" I asked, but something didn't sit right with me. Amber seemed flustered, and the guy looked way too smug. Later, while she was at work, I did some digging and discovered that they'd been seeing each other for about a month. There were love letters, no effort to hide them. We had agreed to be exclusive, but when I confronted her, she played it off, claiming they were just friends. I told her to go to hell and left. For weeks, I ignored her calls and threw out her letters without reading them. When her friends tried to talk to me, I shut them down too. I wasn't interested. I even told my own friends that if she wanted to be with her grandpa, she was welcome to. Being cheated on is something I can't stand. Eventually, she tracked me down and somehow convinced me to give her another chance. I laid down the law, one more mistake, and I was gone for good. 2 years later, we got married, but it wasn't all smooth sailing. 11 years into the marriage, Amber threatened to divorce me. My drinking, long work hours, and frequent travel had taken a toll. She was done sharing her life with me. We fought, and I promised to cut back on work and drinking for the sake of our daughter, Allison. Reluctantly, Amber agreed, but only under strict conditions. She started separating our finances and lives, preparing for what she called the inevitable. I was frustrated that she didn't seem to care about making things work, but she shrugged it off and left the room. I stuck it out, and after a couple of years, things improved. I think it was mostly because my income skyrocketed. I paid more in taxes than she made in a year. Keeping our finances separate benefited me. I bought motorcycles, a sailboat, learned to fly, and even picked up a Cessna. I dressed in designer suits, drove a new BMW, and bought our weekend retreat without any input or financial help from her. I still paid for household expenses and vacations, but she wanted more of the lifestyle I was enjoying on my own. That's when she started easing up. But I'm not sure we ever fully recovered from those early years. 2 years ago, I seriously considered divorce. Amber had become more confrontational, turning into a complete shrew. I felt like I was walking on eggshells. Our intimacy had dried up to twice a year, and even then, it felt more like we were scratching an itch than sharing anything meaningful. I suspected she was having affairs, but I had no proof. If she was cheating, it wasn't anything long-term, maybe just the occasional fling during her business trips. She was good at hiding it. With Allison away at college, things came to a head one night after she publicly humiliated me, ripping into my looks and character. I couldn't take it anymore and gave her an ultimatum. Either we fix this marriage or we end it. I told her I wasn't going to live like two strangers anymore. She didn't take me seriously until I had the divorce papers drawn up. That got her attention. We fought for days, but for the first time in years, we were actually communicating. To my surprise, she said she didn't want a divorce. She promised to try harder, to recommit to our relationship. I was skeptical, but I still loved her, so I gave in. We agreed on new rules for communication and intimacy. I took the lead in rebuilding our marriage, and while she participated, it felt like I was doing most of the heavy lifting. A year into it, I asked her to take more of an active role, but she stayed in the background. Even though I listened to her complaints and tried to address them, I still had strong feelings for her. She went along with everything I suggested, and things got better. Our communication improved, and we started having more regular sex, twice a week, sometimes more. While she wasn't as adventurous as she used to be, she seemed content to try new things. I thought we were in a good place. But after her 50th birthday, something shifted. The affection waned, and the intimacy dried up again. When I asked her about it, she blamed work stress and said things would improve once her projects calmed down. But they didn't. I didn't think much of her late nights at first. Work had always been demanding, but it became excessive. I spent more weekends alone at the country house, and when we did have sex, it felt like she was just going through the motions. Afterward, she'd roll over and go to sleep, or sometimes she'd leave the room altogether. During the evenings and weekends, she avoided me like the plague. When she couldn't, she seemed irritated. I recognized the pattern. The old Amber was back. Over the past 2 years, we had worked hard to avoid letting issues fester. We agreed to address problems head-on before they escalated. We had zero tolerance for deflection, excuses, or avoidance. But when I brought up my concerns about her schedule, lack of affection, and our dying sex life, she shut me down. For days, I tried to talk to her, but she dismissed everything. Finally, she told me to forget about the rules and leave her alone. I was livid, but I reminded her that we had agreed these rules were important. Her response? Go negotiate with your right hand. Her message couldn't have been clearer. Was she cheating? Maybe. While Texas is a no-fault state, I still needed to know the truth. Our marriage was falling apart, but I hated being lied to, and this time there had to be consequences. I had always been clear about my stance on fidelity. Attraction might be beyond our control, but actions aren't. I had told her that if she ever found herself drawn to someone else, she should be honest, and we'd get a divorce. That way, at least there'd be respect. But if she chose to sneak around behind my back, it would be a whole different story. I'd promised to give her the same courtesy. I needed clarity, and frankly, I had some other things to take care of. About 8 years before we started keeping separate finances, I had quietly diverted a chunk of money into a personal investment account. I hadn't told Amber because I figured I'd handle investments better. Turns out I was right. The account grew substantially. Amber had pushed for us to file taxes separately, a habit she started over a decade ago, so I never had to reconcile the account with her. Suspecting that she might be hiding money too, I justified my secrecy. I'd planned on surprising her with the funds when we retired, if we made it that far. But if she was cheating, well, that changed everything. I needed to protect my assets. No way I was going to let betrayal go unpunished. And I had to find a way to gain control of our joint finances and the properties. The house in Dallas was in my name, but she was emotionally tied to it. She loved that place. I was more interested in keeping our country retreat, the one I spent 10 years paying for, furnishing, and maintaining. If it came down to it, I'd sell it before I'd let her have it. In exchange, I'd be willing to give her the Dallas house. She could have it if it meant I got to keep the one I cherished. This wasn't going to be a quick process, and knowing she might hit me with divorce papers any day, I had to move fast. The first step? Talk to a lawyer. I called up an old college buddy who was a corporate lawyer in Dallas. We met for beers that evening at a roadhouse, and I laid out my situation. He referred me to a top-notch family lawyer and shared some personal insights. The legal news wasn't good. Essentially, I was screwed. In a no-fault state like Texas, there wasn't much I could do to protect my assets. Amber could walk away with half no matter what she'd done. Even if she cheated, the law wouldn't care. I could end up giving her half of everything and paying alimony while she moved in with her boyfriend. My friend looked at me and grinned. "Don't go for a divorce," he said. "Change the game. Investigate. If she's cheating, confront her and make the clean break. Let her be the one to file and bear the financial burden." He pointed me toward a ruthless family lawyer, someone he'd fear in his own divorce. So that became Plan B. Amber's free ride was over. She continued avoiding me, and I let her. I stopped asking about her schedule, her weekends, or our dwindling sex life. She must have thought I'd accepted it. I spent most of my time at our country house, and oddly, she seemed happier with that arrangement. The new lawyer helped me make some changes, updating my will, changing beneficiaries on my insurance policies, and suggesting a private investigator. Even though Texas is no fault, she explained that having some visual evidence could make a difference during negotiations. I agreed, and she set me up with an investigator known for getting results. I chose the full surveillance package. Within days, I had the who, when, and how long. They were already working on getting video evidence. A week later, I was sitting in front of that evidence, and it hit harder than I expected. The affair itself wasn't even remarkable. He wasn't in better shape than me, didn't have anything I didn't, and most of the time he couldn't even satisfy her. She did the same things with him as she did with me, but he constantly badmouthed me during their encounters. That hurt the most. She even suggested they have sex in our bed, and they did. She didn't bother insisting he use protection and even floated the idea of involving me in some twisted scenario, since I hadn't been paying attention to her lately. They actually discussed how to make that happen. I realized in that moment, I didn't really know this woman. The emptiness I felt was overwhelming. Discovering infidelity is one thing, but watching it unfold is a whole different beast. I was too drained to even fight. I secured the evidence and handed it over to my lawyer, telling her to make sure Allison got it if something happened to me. I prepaid Allison's college tuition from our joint account, then liquidated my investment account. I was going to live off that money for as long as I could. 2 weeks later, I stood in my house one last time, looking around. I left my keys, wallet, and phone on the foyer desk, like I always did. I took off my wedding ring and placed it on my pillow, on what used to be my side of the bed. Then I walked out the front door without looking back. I didn't even bother to close it. I got in my truck and drove away. About 2 weeks after that, some guy got mugged outside a Motel 6. He was in his 40s, married, with 3 kids. The attack left him with a limp that would last the rest of his life. A month later, his wife got a FedEx package with a video showing him in a compromising position with a woman in her 50s. Within a year, they divorced, and he was left broke. As for me, I drove aimlessly for 3 days. I didn't have a plan. Eventually, I stopped for lunch in a small town and decided to stay for a while. I signed up for welding classes at a local community college. A year later, I got a welding job at an auto body shop. I wasn't certified, but people didn't mind. They were happy to pay someone who wasn't charging certified welder prices for smaller jobs. For 2 years, I traveled across the country, drifting from one small town to the next, taking on jobs where I could. It was the best time I'd had in years. I felt free. Dallas had weighed me down. Despite the good pay, I hated every day I spent there. I had done it for my family, especially for Allison, and Amber had loved the lifestyle my job provided. She enjoyed the virtue signaling of working at a nonprofit, even though her actual paycheck was a joke. The real show was the fundraising events, where she and her colleagues wore designer dresses that cost more than most people earned in a year. It was all for appearances. In truth, those events barely helped anyone. They were more about the wives of wealthy businessmen feeling good about themselves. Meanwhile, I was stuck in a job I hated, doing it all for the sake of my family and the expectations society had placed on me. After walking away from that life, I made a vow to never let myself be trapped in something that didn't bring me personal fulfillment again. During those 3 years, I had casual relationships with several women. Sure, the encounters were fun, but I was only in it for myself. I made sure they enjoyed it too, but the goal was clear. It was about me. If things got too complicated or anyone became too clingy, I'd end it right there. I wasn't interested in a relationship, much less a life partner. Just something physical. I've moved on since then, with no real desire to revisit the past. I don't know what happened to Amber, the house, or even the land we owned in the countryside. She made her choices, and if she's happy, fine. But deep down, part of me hopes she's miserable and struggling financially. I won't do anything to make it happen, though. As for Allison, I sometimes think about reconnecting with her, but only if she can promise me Amber wouldn't find out. So far, she hasn't been able to make that promise, so I keep waiting, holding on to that hope. As far as I know, Dean, my friend, is content. He left behind a cheating wife and a soul-sucking job. He's not looking back. Why would he? He's happy now, healthy, and living life on his own terms. His marriage was a source of misery, and once he let it go, he realized the only good things that came out of it were his daughter and, eventually, his freedom. He was the only one who really cared about the marriage. His wife, she just provided physical affection, and even that wasn't much. Funny thing is, after leaving and meeting other women, he realized what she offered wasn't anything special. She never brought her best to the relationship. He was played for 24 years. That's not worth sticking around for, let alone returning to. Hey, Matt, how about another round of beers? I called over to the bartender. He told me once he figured Amber was a narcissist, and in his mind, the best revenge was indifference. How could he be indifferent if he stuck around, though? He realized that walking away from everything, their life together, would send the strongest message. He knew it might take years, but he was sure she'd eventually crumble, and in that, he'd win. Dean sighed, then nodded. You're quite the character, Miles. That's one hell of a story. Where's your friend now? I shrugged. Who knows? Probably off welding something or getting lucky with a new woman. Probably in Wisconsin, he mentioned wanting to visit. Wherever he is, I'm betting he's content and not looking to change a thing. By the way, why hasn't Mrs. Smith just filed for divorce on the grounds of abandonment? Wouldn't that give her control of the assets she's after? Seems like an easy fix for her, and you wouldn't have to go chasing down strangers. Dean leaned back, shaking his head. There's nothing left to control. She tried filing for abandonment, but by the time she got around to it, she'd lost everything. The house, the country property, even her job. Really? What happened? And why are you still hunting this guy down? She ran out of money, couldn't keep up with the payments, and since she couldn't sell the properties, they went into foreclosure. The house was bought by some elderly couple, and the country estate, that went to a company called Iron Ridge Enterprises, a metal arts consulting firm. As for her job, well, she lost that after her affair with a married colleague came to light. Damn, I said, shaking my head. Sounds like she's had a rough go of it, huh? Dean nodded. Yep. Anyway, Miles, sorry to waste your time, but this meeting wasn't half bad. He pulled out $40, tossed it on the table, stood up, and offered me his hand. No hard feelings? None, I replied, shaking his hand. But be careful who you mess with next time. You're lucky I'm a patient man. He laughed, taking a few steps away before stopping and calling back without turning around. Miles? For what it's worth, Amber still loves him. She's filled with regret, hopes for reconciliation, even. She's not doing well, drinking too much and falling into depression. I scoffed. Women like her don't know the meaning of love, Dean. Their love is self-serving, tied to what they can get from others. It's all about greed and selfishness. She's sorry, but only because she got caught and the money dried up. If she were truly sorry, she'd think about her daughter's pain, about the harm she caused by taking her father away. But she's not. She's only sorry she got found out. Women like that don't deserve men like him. She'll never see it that way because, in her warped mind, the world revolves around her. Love, respect, honesty, those things only matter to her when they serve her own agenda. Don't you think he and his daughter deserve better? Dean turned around slowly. Darren? Yeah. Elliot? Wisconsin's winters are brutal, but I hear Allison likes it there. Maybe Iron Ridge Enterprises should set up shop in Eagle River. I smiled. Thanks, Elliot. That's a thought. It just might happen. Thanks for watching this emotional story of love, lust, and lies. Hope it touched your heart. If you enjoyed it, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a fresh story every day. Love to hear your thoughts in the comments, so feel free to share your experiences and tell your story.